Good morning. Today's scripture reading is going to be from the book of Matthew, 5th chapter, verses 13 through 16. Be reading the English Standard. And it reads, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Be seated.
Amen. Thank you, Larry. Good morning, church. You guys sound lively and chipper today. I'm always excited to hear that. Y'all are gonna need it. I'm just kidding. I might be a little bit more sluggish today. Today's kind of a special Sunday for me. Mom and Dad are here together for the first time. They're situated right over here by Maggie. Dad in his quintessential Cowboys blue today, doing his best to ingratiate himself with you guys. I realized this morning when the Ellises came in that he's like a chocolatey version of Paul. So if you want to know Dad, that's what you're going to get. He is ready to argue in the most good-natured way. But I'm excited to have them here. We got to have a little Thanksgiving family meal together yesterday, so I might be a little bit sluggish off that mac and cheese that he likes to throw down. We're going to talk about the Sermon on the Mount today as we continue our foray into the most iconic teaching of Jesus. Last week, we actually began this study talking about the context and how that this was Jesus' first public delivery of a sermon, and how wild it is, honestly, in my opinion, that Jesus comes and he unpacks the whole armory of the kingdom all at once from the very beginning. I find that to be very impressive. Not that I'm surprised, because this is Jesus we're talking about, the greatest teacher ever, the Son of God. But I remember back when I was coming up in the engineering world, they said, if you really want to go far in your career, you got to learn to underpromise and overdeliver. If you tell somebody that you're going to get to their regular Category 1 problem by tomorrow, and then a real Category 5 problem emerges and you don't get to it till Friday, well, they're going to think you're the worst engineer ever and they're going to hate working with you. But if you tell them that you'll get to it by Friday and you actually get to it by tomorrow, they're going to love you and it's going to do well for your relationship. So always underpromise and overdeliver. If you have the choice between overpromising and underdelivering, always choose to underpromise and overdeliver. Meet to or work to exceed the expectation that you set, not in reverse. And then when I transitioned into this life of ministry, I got similar advice. I said, hey, every time you go to a new church, never throw your best pitch on the first date. Because if that's all you got, you're going to regret it, and so will they for the rest of the time that you're there. So throw something from the middle of your deck, and if they love it, then you're in the right place. But this is not how Jesus operates. He starts things off with the Sermon on the Mount. This is as good as it's going to get, as deep as it's going to get, and he's going to live out in living color everything that he lays down in this sermon from the very beginning. He comes out throwing haymakers and just drops these 3 chapters here in the Gospel of Matthew, and then also Luke records it, and the kingdom begins to forcefully advance indeed, as Jesus has said. And last week we talked about who was there and where they were from, and why Matthew was quick to draw attention to the reality that Jesus has begun proclaiming this new kingdom at hand. And this new kingdom didn't look like we would expect, and it certainly didn't look like the Jews would expect, and it was made up of all the different different factions of Judaism and who was in Judea at the time, as well as Gentiles. And Matthew calls up Isaiah chapter 9 to remind his audience of this shocking fact that this new kingdom and this new light that had come into the world was going to shine even into the dark places and even to the Gentiles. This diverse group of people flocks to Jesus at this scene, and he senses and feels the discomfort of his disciples, and he begins to teach them. And he begins with the Beatitudes that we studied last week, a subversive list of blessings, proclaiming that those whom we by our standards would assume do not have a place in the kingdom are actually blessed. And those Beatitudes redefine what it actually means to have God's favor resting on you, and suggested that all of the people that were coming to Jesus on this event that the disciples were looking at and wondering, do they really belong here, were the people that have a place in the kingdom, the people that God is actually with. And Jesus looks at his disciples and he said, blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those. The people you believe are outsiders, the people that belong here. And at the center of that teaching was the teaching that blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And those Beatitudes turned out not to be a list of the kinds of different people that get to be in the kingdom, but they turned out to be a list of the attributes of one kind of person, a person who has entered the kingdom, a person who is experiencing the power of the kingdom in their life, and a person who is now bringing the kingdom into the world around them. And that brings us to where we are at the beginning of this sermon. Verses 10 through 12, we see the Beatitudes at first glance look like blessings of good types of behavior, but it's not that at all. And I hope after we're finished today, over the last 2 weeks, we've utterly dismantled that assumption about what this list of teachings from Jesus mean and what they're there for. The list of blessings and pronouncements of God's favor are a heavy, difficult teaching for the disciples and for us. And if it wasn't challenging enough, do you notice what Jesus does in verse 10 and 11? It's really subtle, but I want you to listen to me real quick. He says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And immediately after that, in verse 11, he now says this, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on your account. Do you see what Jesus has done? It's really subtle. Jesus has been looking at the crowds and talking to his disciples and teaching them and saying, blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those. And he just jab, hooks, all of a sudden switches the tense and the direction of who he's talking to. And he's not talking about the crowds to the disciples anymore. He's talking about the disciples to the disciples. And when he switches who he's speaking of, he now brings it with the word that we love. The word that we love so much and look forward to in our comfort-loving American selves, that word, persecution. And the whole time it was blessed are those, but now that we're talking about persecution, it's blessed are you. And even worse, it's not blessed are you if they persecute you, church. It's blessed are you when they persecute you, church. It's a foregone conclusion. It's inevitable. If you are in the kingdom, it is going to happen. And so Jesus gives this very important but very hard teaching here. He's looking at the crowds and he's looking at his disciples and he's saying, this is what the kingdom looks like. These are what the kingdom looks like. This is what it takes to bring kingdom. And this is what you will experience if you participate in my kingdom. This is what you should expect. You should expect the same persecution that they heaped upon the prophets that came before you, because that is what it takes to bring the kingdom of heaven into this world. If you do this, disciples, if you do this today, church, if you follow me, if you pursue the kingdom, if you oppose empire by being poor in spirit, if you oppose the spirit of this world by mourning and by exhibiting and demonstrating and living out meekness and mercy, if you truly hunger and thirst for righteousness, if you make peace, the world that currently is, the way that man thinks, they will revile you and persecute you. And they will do it because they don't want this story. They think they do, they will say they do, but they want power. They want to coerce. They want prosperity. They want a happy, comfortable story. Nobody thinks that they're winning when they're mourning or when they feel hunger. Nobody thinks they're winning when they can't do it on their own and have to ask for help. Nobody thinks they're winning when they have to extend mercy. Nobody really, truly wants to have peace. They want to win. And he says, you guys are going to proclaim to this stubborn world that the Gentiles are in the kingdom. How do you think that's going to go, church? How do you think that felt? Jesus said to them, hey, listen, if you want to be a part of this, it's not for the faint of heart. And I would be remiss if I didn't say to you today, modern church, modern disciples, modern family of God, it is not for the faint of heart. But Jesus also says to his disciples in that moment, this is what all of the prophets who came before you were trying to get to. This is what they saw. This is what they testified of. Peter would write of this in his epistles too. This is what the prophets looked forward to, recognizing that it wasn't for them, but now for you to whom the glory of the gospel has been revealed. This is the stuff that dreams are made of. Yes, it's going to be hard, and yes, they're going to hate you, but it's going to be worth it. And that leads me to the difficult question of the day, because what Jesus has laid out for me and what he's saying, I'm hearing him say it's going to be worth it, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, but how? Why? Why is it worth it to sign up to be persecuted? Why is it worth it to sign up to show mercy when I should get what's mine or get justice? Why is it worth it to sign up to mourn? Why is it worth it to subvert my own strength and carry a posture of meekness under control? Why is it worth it not to go and take care of mine? And so why, Jesus? Why is it worth it? And immediately on the back of the Beatitudes, Jesus launches into one of his grand metaphors. And he starts talking about a couple of different elements present in the world, familiar to them and familiar to us, even though a little bit different. And he brings up another famous, iconic passage. He starts telling them this in verse 13. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house in the same way. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. What's happened here? Jesus has transitioned from direct statements to powerful metaphors. He is taking that challenging what that is in the Beatitudes, and now he's using a metaphor and imagery to tell us why. Now, we have been trained only to think of the why relation in the end game, haven't we? Haven't we been taught, or haven't we assumed that these Beatitudes are all basically just about getting to heaven when you die? That what you do, why you are here, why you're dealing with this rant that's happening in front of you right now, why you go to church, why you try to be a good Christian, why do you try to be a good person, that's all essentially about what you can get for your trouble in this life, for your good behavior in this life, what you can earn in this life. And I want to say two things. Number one, we absolutely can and should be looking forward to what God has planned and prepared for his children, because the Hebrew writer told us that without faith it's impossible to please him, and whoever would draw near to God must believe first that he exists, but also that he does reward those who seek him. I'm not saying you shouldn't be looking forward to your reward, but I am saying that if you think the point of your life is only this, if you think you are only here just to make it safely into the new heavens and new earth, if that's the only reason you got out of bed this morning because you're playing a game, if you think your life of following a self-sacrificing Savior is basically about self-acquisition and preservation, you are in grave danger of missing the kingdom altogether. As we shall see later in the sermon, why we do what we do and the heart we do it with matters more to Jesus than what we do. So please keep that in mind. When Jesus calls you to follow him and you come into the kingdom, your reward in heaven is great, but your purpose in this life is just as great. And that's what this teaching is about. When you come into the kingdom, your reward in heaven is great, but your purpose in this life, in this realm, before that happens, is just as great. It actually matters. And here's why. Jesus is showing the progression of the kingdom from beginning on a personal scale in the Beatitudes, growing into a community scale, and then a worldwide scale. See, the Beatitudes, if you remember last week, describe what it's like to enter the kingdom, to become a disciple of Jesus and have his power and his light and his joy and his healing and his righteousness come into your life. But now he's talking about what the result of that is and what the point of that is. Once that new reality comes into your life, now you and your life collide with all the lives around you, bringing that same power and life and joy and healing and righteousness? Do you see the progression of the kingdom moving outward and advancing through the changed life of someone who enters the kingdom and experiences the kingdom, but now they bring the kingdom to everybody around them? This is the point. Jesus is calling his disciples and us into the mission of a lifetime, the greatest adventure you could ever imagine. He's saying your purpose is to bring hope to the world that is in decay and darkness. Look at Jesus' statement. What can we learn from what he says about the natural state of the world? This is not just about talking about salt and light and cities, which we will do this morning, but you have to understand the statement he's making about the natural state of the world. He says it's decaying. It is falling apart. And before we jump into the specifics, I just want you to admit the rising cynicism that you gain in your life from the age of 26 and beyond, when all of your youthful ambition and hope is wiped away and you realize that people are still people and they're going to be difficult forever. And the world is still the world and it's going to be difficult forever. And you start to injure yourself just by sleeping. You realize everything is falling apart. We are. Physically, your body's falling apart. Collagen is a limited resource you can't make anymore. You get wrinkles and crow's feet and beauty lines, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's falling apart. Nature's falling apart. We go through the seasons, we watch it happen. You know how difficult it is to keep things together. I have to stretch now longer than I actually lift, just not to die on that floor every day. It takes hard work not to fall apart. Any relationship that you're in, marriages, raise your hand. Hard to keep that thing together, isn't it? Less than half of people do. Everything meaningful in life is falling apart. Everything. The Cowboys are falling apart. Jerry Joe's might be physically falling apart. It's spread to the whole organization. Even the stadium is falling apart. What y'all gonna do? We got to admit this is the way things go in life. And because of that, we have a rising cynicism. We don't trust that things are going to be okay. Anybody have anxiety in the room? We have an inherent understanding that things are not okay. Something is wrong. We don't trust our educational enterprise anymore. We don't trust our government anymore. People don't trust the church anymore. You're sitting beside somebody who you're not sure if you trust anymore. We have an understanding that things in their natural state fall apart. They come undone. This is what they do. So when Jesus says you are salt, which is a preservative, he is making a statement about the natural condition of the world that we find ourselves in. And this is not just Jesus being metaphysical, because if you're a science buff, they probably taught you in the 8th grade, there is something called the entropic principle. They tell you at a molecular level, everything in the universe is trending towards chaos. Why should we be surprised that the world needs a preservative? Jesus is saying the world needs something from outside of itself to save it and preserve it. He's also saying when you're light, that the world is naturally in a state of darkness. He's also saying, if you are the hope, that the world in its natural state is careening hopelessly and disoriented. Listen, salt is actually the perfect analogy, especially in those days, because as you've maybe heard before, salt had two main purposes. Yes, one, it was a preservative. It was used to keep things from spoiling. In a world before freezers and refrigeration, the only way to keep your meat from going bad was to salt it, and salt it heavily immediately. Now, that's the only way to keep it from falling apart. Jesus is saying that you who are in the kingdom are the preserving agent to stop the decay of the lives and communities around you. You are the preserving influence. But here's where I think we get it twisted, because this sounds good. Yeah, I'm the salt. The world is better because I am in it. I am bringing a good influence to the people around me, but you don't understand what it actually took to get salt into the meat to keep it from going bad. Anybody ever preserved meat by salting it? Anybody done that? You don't give it a little Morton sprinkle. It has to be pressed into it. In some cases, you have to beat it into the meat with a hammer. It's got to get deep down in there. It's got to get as deep as your grandmother thought the Robitussin would go on every single ailment in your house. It's got to get driven in there. So how do you salt things? You have to be pressed into it. And so here's how you know if you're actually salt. Here's how you know if you're actually bringing the kingdom. Here's how you know if you're actually serving this function. What are the places of brokenness and decay that are around you on a daily basis, physically, morally, emotionally, spiritually? When you see that, do you go rushing in? Do you press yourself into difficult situations? When you see somebody in need, do you press yourself into difficult situations? When you see somebody struggling, do you press yourself into situations when you see people are hurting and disintegrating and decaying and things are coming apart in their life? Or are you too busy to be salt? Are we too unbothered to be salt? Are we too snobbish to be salt? Are we too judgmental to be salt? If they just made better decisions, they wouldn't be in this position. Is that the salt's job to say? Are we pressing ourselves into these? Look, when you see brokenness, is your first instinct to get into a mess? Is it to sit with them? Is it to find a way to bring healing and stop decay? Or is our first instinct to run the other way? Have we been transformed by the reality of the Beatitudes that Jesus just taught when he said, "Blessed are the merciful"? Have we received mercy that Jesus has been pressed himself into every wound and brokenness that we have? He has stopped the infection. He stopped the spread. He has preserved you and me and all of us as a peculiar people, a royal generation that brings the salty quality of Jesus into the world everywhere that we go. Second, salt brings joy and enjoyment. It brings glorious flavor to a dish. Salt enhances flavor of food. It brings out little tastes and complexities that you otherwise would never experience. And some of y'all are painfully aware that in 4 days, y'all are going to learn just how important a little salt is when you sit at that Thanksgiving Day table. I got a theory. Here's my theory. People that prefer ham on holidays, and ham is good. This is not to throw shade at ham, but if you prefer ham on the thing we call Turkey Day as opposed to turkey, I got a theory. Here's my theory. You've never had good turkey. Because if you have actually had a good turkey, it's nothing like it, baby. But most of our experiences was mom or grandma or auntie waking up at 4 a.m. and she just basting and buttering and stuffing and basting, and it's hot in the house. You're not allowed to walk in there because she's sleep deprived and she's angry, and the whole family waits in anticipation of this Thanksgiving meal, and she has poured her soul into this bird. And you know she has, and you sit at the table and you slice it and you put that first bite in your mouth and it tastes like you're chewing drywall. And you try to cover it with gravy, and you need some stuffing, and you need some sweet potatoes, but nothing can save it. And she basted and basted and basted, and it'll sit in the fridge because you're about to waste it. Maybe we try ham next year. I think we'll try ham next year. That's my theory. That's my theory. I digress. Look, the point is that salt enhances the food that it seasons. And Jesus is saying that his disciples, people of the kingdom, Christians, people like us, enhance the lives of the people around them. They bring out joy and taste and flavor to the lives that they touch. They make it better. Here's the incriminating part. Here's the introspective part for us this morning. From the point of view of the people who encounter you every single day, are you like encountering a chunk of bland turkey? Is it hard to chew you up and get you down? Are you hard to swallow? When they see you coming, are they excited? Or have you spent 6 hours figuring out how you're about to be the biggest pain in the butt you can be on Thursday? Look, when you walk in the room, are you a wet blanket? Do you see the flaw in every situation? You call yourself being careful and safe? Do you just suck the life out of a room? Jesus says that's not what Christians do. I think sometimes we pride ourselves too much in being realistic. We're really just pessimistic. And we're not walking in joy. So you can fail to be salty enough, but the other end of the spectrum is you could be too salty. Y'all know someone who's too salty. Some of you guys have animated faces. You can't hide how you're feeling, and there's a person that when they walk in the room, you look like you took a bite of something with too much salt, just puckered up immediately. You better stop. Collagen's depleting. Those wrinkles will stay. No, mama said your face will get stuck like that. She wasn't lying. It just takes like 50 years. It's going to be like that. Last week I said sometimes I'm persecuted for my sake, not for Jesus' sake. Listen, family, sometimes you can be too salty, and that makes the kingdom feel unsufferable. Look, over-salting a dish ruins the dish and does nothing but raises people's blood pressure. When you walk in a room, do you see veins and foreheads? Do you see people have to restrain themselves because they can't deal with what you're about to, like, is that, you know someone when they walk in the room, you immediately get hot? You already know what it's going to be. There might be someone at your table this Thursday, and that is not to, create a difficult situation for your family. I'm just saying, everybody has a person that if you had a real life block button, you would have hit it a long time ago. Are you a person who says you are a Christian in the kingdom, but you get a kick out of raising other people's blood pressure? You can't wait to tell them exactly why the election went the way that it went. You better stop. That's not the kingdom. That's too salty. Do you take pride in getting under people's skin, being right in every discussion for the sake of the argument, feeling superior in your faith and dedication? You're being over salty, my friends. Jesus says people who are part of the kingdom enhance their families, enhance their workplaces, enhance their communities and their relationships. Thursday is Thanksgiving, church. Who is looking forward to being with you? I don't care about who you're looking forward to be with. You're supposed to be the salt. Who needs you in their dish? Who needs you in their room? Who needs you in their office? Who needs you in their church? Who's looking forward to seeing you back at the office after the holiday's over? Who's looking forward to you walking in their restaurant in 30 minutes? And some of y'all, all y'all got was, we got another 30 minutes of him. Y'all are too salty. Lastly, salt is a collaborative agent. Here's what I mean by that. Never in the history of the earth did a single granule of salt save that bad turkey. Never in the history of the earth did a single granule of salt change things for the better or preserve anything. Salt only works to enhance and preserve when it's with a bunch of other salt crystals. You feel me? Jesus means that people who are part of his kingdom need to work together if they want to have a meaningful impact on the world. You can't be salty all by yourself. The church should be a model of unity and love that demonstrates to the watching world what healthy relationships and healthy communities under the lordship of Jesus looks like. It's not about your personal gain. It's not about what you can get. It's about the world that needs you and what we collectively bring in our saltiness. That's the salt. In verse 14, in the second part, he talks about the city set on a hill. He says it cannot be hidden. And the emphasis of his teaching on unity and what we just said about the salt comes through even stronger, because when Jesus calls his followers a city on a hill, you got to realize an isolated person cannot be a city. Even if you're not talking about Jesus' teachings. He said a long time ago, it takes a village to raise an idiot. It takes a community to get anything done. An isolated person can't be a city. A city takes community and people coming together collaboratively to achieve the goals and good of their fellow citizens. Salt can't enhance food alone. A person cannot be a city on a hill by themselves. And I'm speaking directly to a person out there who thinks that their best bet in this life is to just have their own private relationship with Jesus. Yeah, you need to have that when you've given up on people and church and community. And I need you to know that that personal relationship with Jesus is not the whole story, because Jesus says your relationship with him is not complete without his church and his community. He says you're part of the city. Do you want your life to matter on an eternal scale? Do you want what you're doing right now to actually mean something? Do you want fulfillment? Do you want purpose? You got to be a part of the city. You'll never experience or achieve the fullness of what God has for you if you're a lone salt granule on the ground in a sea of dry turkey. You'll never get it done. You got to be part of the city. But let's talk about cities really quick. The historical context of Jesus' metaphor to me is astounding, and I hope y'all didn't think you'd get through a lesson without a nerdy side trail. Here's your nerdy rabbit hole of the day. A city on a hill didn't happen by accident. A city on a hill happened out of necessity. It plays into what Jesus is saying about the world actually needs people of the kingdom. because you had to build a city next to specific resources that were life-giving. You had to build a city near a source of water, preferably fresh water, like a river or a freshwater lake. You had to build a city where there was fertile land that could be farmed. This is an agrarian society. You had to build a city, hopefully, where there was some sort of defensive feature that you could be safe. Maybe it's at the base of a mountain, or maybe it's got water surrounding it on 3 sides. Yeah, Pittsburgh, actually a pretty good place to build a city. Like, you needed specific things for the city to be viable. So historically, when a city was conquered and burned and razed, when they came to resettle the area and repopulate it, they couldn't just put a new city anywhere. So they would build the city on top of the first city. And there are so many instances in history where it's happened multiple times, again and again and again. We just spent time in Rome a few months ago. It's exactly like that, layer upon layer upon layer. And what happened over these centuries is you would end up with cities sitting on hills. And they were on hills because they were built on the foundation of a city that happened before and happened again. Because you couldn't just put it anywhere you wanted to. So these cities were built where they were built because there was something that people needed to survive and thrive that you couldn't get anywhere else. Do you see what Jesus is saying? You are a city on a hill. You are here on purpose by design. You have access to resources that people need to thrive and live together that they cannot get anywhere else. You got to build a city by a river or a source of water, just practically, physically, and the only place where you can get the living water is in Christ Jesus in his city. You're a city on a hill because you have access to resources that no one else has. It was probably a walled city or a gated city. It offered protection when times of inclement weather or raiding or war happened. The city gates are a place of commerce and provision and distribution of food and clothes. Poor people lived outside of the city walls. Middle class actually lived inside of the actual walls, and then the rich were deep safe inside of the center of the city. Quite literally, a city on a hill would have been impossible to miss, but it would have represented a beacon of hope for all of the surrounding people. It's where you could go if you needed food, if you needed provision, if you needed safety, if you needed protection. A city on a hill didn't happen by accident, and it had very specific things that people needed. Jesus' point is that kingdom people have indispensable resources necessary for human flourishing that they can't get anywhere else. Only in the city of God do people have access to the river of life. Only in the city of God do people have access to the real salt that holds all things together by the word of his power. Only in the city of God do people have access to the light of the world by which the real reality we live in is illuminated. You see what Jesus is doing when he says, you are salt and you are light. He's positioning the kingdom almost like a colony. Can I use that word? I don't know if I can use that word. Am I canceled? Can I say that? A colony. We're new humanity within humanity. And Paul would draw on this imagery strongly when he writes to Ephesians. The Ephesians, or the letter that he wrote to them, is all about being a new humanity inside of the world. Jesus says a city on a hill is a community in which strong families and race relations and ethical business happens and genuine friendships happen. And this is all modeled out in a way that is different from the world that is around us. The city on a hill is a community that bears witness to God's transforming power in each of our lives. And lastly, on the city, if you've ever been somewhere without light pollution, probably the first time I experienced this was when I went to Africa. There was no light pollution in the Serengeti. Without light pollution, a city in the distance is a shining beacon. If you've ever been in a place where there would be only candles in the moonlight, a city on a hill that is lit up at nighttime as a sanctuary to the weary traveler by night, it's a star in the distance. And this is why Jesus wraps the salt along with the light. He says, you are the light of the world, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. I don't know if you've ever been somewhere where you've experienced complete and total darkness. You drive down the road to inner space caverns and let them cut the lights out on you. If you've ever been in a situation like that, it is actually disorienting. Sensory deprivation will drive you crazy in a hot second. The darkness in a place like that, once you've experienced it, I can only describe it by it's thick, it's heavy. It's a thing, like it has weight to it, and it's suffocating, like it weighs down on you. When Jesus says you're salt, he's saying that the world is deteriorating. And when he says you are light, he's saying that the world is in disorienting, disintegrating darkness. Not just a little dark, a lot dark, total darkness, heavy darkness. Jesus saying this, that we are the light of the world, means that without us, without people of the kingdom, the world is in hopeless, disorienting darkness. Just as light dispels darkness and reveals what is hidden, Christians, by reflecting the light of Christ, should expose the truth and beauty of God's kingdom in a world that is shrouded in darkness. And look what he says. We're not just a light. The type of light actually matters. Jesus says we are a lamp. Now, a lamp back in those days is not an electric lamp. A lamp in those days is like a wick floating in some oil or a candle. What's significant about that is that a candle or a lamp is not the source of the light that it has. And sometimes I think we get that mistaken. I think it would be wise for all of us to pray every day, Lord, help me to remember that I'm a reflection of the light and not the source of it. Because that's how we end up treating people too salty. And that's how we end up caring too much about our own needs and not being salt at all. The only way that a lamp or a candle gets light is if it's ignited and fueled by the actual light. That means you won't be salt and you won't be light until God lights you up. And God is not going to light you up on 43 minutes of a sermon this Sunday once a week. Remember we talked about being in the eremos, spending that private time with God every day? I hope you don't think you can be lit without getting lit. I hope not. Listen. 3 things about this light, and we'll finish this morning. Light does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it exposes decay and darkness. Light exposes the true nature of things. A Christian's life illuminated by Christ should make the darkness around you more apparent. I read this quote in study. I think I'll share it with you. It's really good. It says, if you're a light, it means your life should be so beautiful that when it enters an environment, the beauty of your life shows up the other things for what they really are. A Christian, just by your very presence, should show up and reveal the dishonesty in a business, the gossip in an office, or the racism in a neighborhood. Just by your presence, being a light, entering an environment where things are corrupted should expose that it's actually corrupted. Because some good old boys who enjoy a little bit of racism from time to time get real uncomfortable when someone walks in that the joke won't fly with. Because some folks that have learned to excuse promiscuity feel really uncomfortable when somebody calls it out in that environment. And some folks that are really, really hooked and addicted to gossip being their self-affirmation feel real uncomfortable when you say to them, hey man, if you got a problem with her, please find a way to share it with her. I'm not going to take part in that. Just your presence will expose decay and darkness. It makes gossip look like gossip, corruption look like corruption. The question that I have based on what Jesus says is, are you that kind of light? Or when you get into that situation, are you under a bowl? Because that's what he says, right? You don't hide it under a bowl. I'm going to let the gossip slide this time because she's the one who's in charge of giving me the promotion. Are we under a bowl or are we a light? The second thing that light does is it guides us into reality. If you turn out all the lights in here, you wouldn't be able to see anything. We don't see the pews because of their own light that they emit. We only see them because the light helps us see what's actually there. In the same way, Christians, by reflecting the light of Christ, help others to see the truth about God and the truth about themselves and the world they live in. It's our job to point others towards Jesus by the way that we live. A good light can change everything. Am I the only one that picked out some clothes in a low light situation and showed up to work and realized that's not the color I thought it was? A good light brings out the real complexity and reality and vividness in life. You're not just there to expose darkness and corruption. Your light should actually be bringing out the true reality of things. You should be bringing out the true picture of things. And when you bring out the true picture of things, the third quality of light that I want you to think about is that it reveals beauty. It shows beauty. You don't get beauty without good life. Look, a Christian's life should be so radiant with the love of Christ that it is attracting other people to you. Just as a good light reveals the true color of an object, a Christian life should illuminate the beauty and goodness of God's character in a way that it draws other people to experience it themselves. Here's how I know this. I'm not just grasping at straws here. I know that it's supposed to be about beauty because there are two words that could have been used here for good deeds. There's a word for good that means of good quality, and then there's another word in the Greek that means beautiful. Guess which one Jesus chooses? When he says, let your good deeds shine, he doesn't say good quality deeds. He says, beautiful. When they see your life, they should say, wow, that is beautiful. That's the attractive component of being a light in the world, of being salt in the world. It means our good deeds aren't done just for the sake of being good. People won't praise God if they think you're a goody two-shoes. Y'all know, we push back up against that from the very beginning. Nobody liked the teacher's pet or tattletale in class except for the tattletale and the teacher's pet. Nobody likes the do-gooder. But nobody can live without beauty. What Jesus is suggesting is a beautiful tension. A Christian, a kingdom person, brings out the best in all situations. Even though you expose gossip in the office, you're somehow the glue that keeps the team together. The beauty of our life shows up racism, and you might get persecution for that, but at the same time, you are the joy of a group of people who are unfairly treated. You don't deal with promiscuity and corruption, but at the same time, you bring a weird and strange stability to all of your relationships. Because a Christian is never looking at the situation and saying, what can I get out of this? That's what everyone else does. A Christian is looking at the situation and saying, how can I bring out the best for everybody in this situation? How can I make this beautiful for everybody? That's why we can't look at salt and light in the Beatitudes as how we get something for what we're doing right. Because it betrays the actual mission and purpose that God has called us to. Family, you are salty, hopefully in the right way. You are a city. You are a light of the world. What a mission. Jesus said it's going to be hard work, but it's the most important purpose you could ever be entrusted with. If we understand these beatitudes and these pronouncements, and we know this is what the kingdom looks like and what happens when you enter the kingdom, and we commit to bringing that kingdom to the world around us, Jesus said, I need you to know that it's a difficult road. You're going to be persecuted, but this is what God's people have always been called to. And you don't do it just for your reward. You do it because you're the salt of the earth. You do it because you are the light of the world. You do it because you are the hope of the world. Here's the truth. The world around you needs you like you need Jesus because the only way they can see Jesus is through you. I'll say that one more time. The world around you needs you like you need Jesus because the only way they can see Jesus is through you. It is our call to give people the opportunity to see the kingdom at work. They're going to see your good deeds. They're going to be beautiful. They're not going to understand it yet. And they're going to glorify your Father in heaven. And glorifying the Father in heaven is the first step to becoming poor in spirit and the hope of the world. I heard a minister say one time that you need to stop telling people they're the hope of the world because the church isn't the hope of the world. Jesus is. And I think that is true. But I think that it stopped short because Jesus has said his chosen instrument for the good he wants to work in the world is me and you. So yeah, none of this is of our own good or our own resources. Remember, we're a reflection, not the source. But don't ever, ever, ever betray the mission that you have been called to. Don't ever think it's okay for you to sit on the sidelines and not be salt and not be light. This is the greatest adventure of all. The kingdom of heaven means that the human prospects on their own are desperate. But because of Jesus, they're also more incredible than they could ever imagine. This teaching means that the kingdom of God is breaking into the world. And when you are in Christ Jesus, the power of that light and that salt and that joy and that hope becomes real in our life and transforms it. And then we find ourselves having the means by which and the power by which God has decided to inject real hope and real salt and real joy and real light into a world that is disoriented and disintegrating without it. That's what this passage is about. That's what the kingdom is about. And so in closing, Jesus opened his most famous sermon by saying, look at me. I'm the king now. And you are going to bring this kingdom. You're going to show them what it looks like. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to like it. They're not going to get it. They already think they understand this. But go be salt, go be light, go be hope, and show them what the kingdom is really up to. Show them what God really looks like. Show them that they can taste and see that he is good. Show them good and beautiful works, and they will glorify him. Family, you've got to press yourself into the world around you. Let them see it. Let them taste it. Let them have hope, and they will glorify our Father who is in heaven. I would just say, may it be so for every single one of us that is here today. If you don't know that hope, if your life is falling apart, if you feel like you are disoriented and trying to find your way in a dark world, it's true. All of it's true. But the light of the world has come into the world, and his kingdom is here now. And that light and that salt and that hope and that healing can be yours too if you will just meet him there. If you need to take a step towards Jesus, please come as we stand and sing.